The Little Prince criticizes the way many adults choose to live their lives, noting that they have forgotten what is truly important and that they could learn a few things from children. As the author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry mentions before the start of his story, all grown-ups were once children, although few of them remember it. The book begins with the narrator of the story saying that when he was 6 years old, he was reading a cool book and saw a picture of a boa constrictor swallowing a wild animal without chewing it. Fascinated and inspired, he created his own drawing, which looked like this. He showed it to some adults in his life and asked them, "Does this scare you?" To which they replied, "Why would a hat scare us?" Upset and annoyed, the narrator had to redraw his masterpiece to explain it better to these adults lacking imagination. His original drawing wasn't a hat, it was a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. That's why they should have been scared. The grown-ups basically told him to quit drawing and to focus on more important, more serious things like grammar, math, history, and geography. He ended up focusing on geography and eventually became a pilot. The pilot then begins his tale of how 6 years ago an engine issue in his plane forced him to land in the Sahara desert. Eventually asleep by his plane, a boy named the Little Prince out of nowhere wakes him up by asking him to draw him a sheep. The pilot, shocked, doesn't ask questions and carries out the request. The Little Prince says the drawing of his first sheep looks too sick. The second one is a ram since the pilot drew it with horns, and the third one looks too old for his liking. Fed up, the pilot draws him a box and says the sheep he wants is inside, and the Little Prince responds, "That's exactly how I wanted it," touching on the theme of how kids have great imaginations, something that adults have lost as they have gotten older. The pilot mentions it in this quote, "But I, unfortunately, do not know how to see sheep through the walls of boxes. Perhaps I am a little like the grown-ups. I must have gotten older." The pilot becomes very intrigued by the Little Prince and where he came from. He suspects that the Little Prince comes from his own tiny planet called Asteroid B-612 and tells the story of its discovery. In 1909, a Turkish astronomer saw it through a telescope and presented his discovery in a professional conference, but no one believed him because of his traditional Turkish outfit, not looking serious enough for the adults he was presenting to. However, in 1920, he presented the exact same information, just dressed all nice and fancy, and the adults accepted his discovery of the asteroid. Here, the author criticizes adults on how they tend to judge books by their cover. The criticism of adults continues as the pilot states that grown-ups do not ask the right questions when you talk to them about a new friend, while kids ask more important questions. Adults are obsessed with numbers and thus like to ask number-based questions like, how old is he? How much does he weigh? How much money does his dad make? While kids ask personality-based questions like, what's the sound of his voice? What games does he like? Judging someone based off their essence, their spirit, and not just numbers associated with that person. The Little Prince then explains to the pilot that there are baobabs on his planet. These trees come from bad seeds and he needs to get rid of them before they get too big and destroy his planet, alluding to how Nazi Germany was occupying France at the time of the book's release. Bad people can ruin your world quickly if you don't do anything about it. The Little Prince also has 3 volcanoes on his planet that he tends to and cleans on a consistent basis. These can be symbols of how we are all responsible for certain things in our lives and that we must tend to them before they erupt and cause us trouble and become more serious problems. The Little Prince mentions that he enjoys sunsets, especially when he is sad, and once saw 44 in one day on his planet, implying that he's been pretty sad about something. The pilot is then fixing his plane, obviously stressed out and fearing death due to where he is and the minimal water he has, while the Little Prince keeps asking him a ton of questions related to a rose on his planet. The pilot snaps, saying that he's dealing with serious matters, and the Little Prince then rages himself because he believes the pilot has his priorities mixed up, not valuing the importance of the relationship between the Little Prince and his rose. The Little Prince is overwhelmed with emotion and begins crying because he misses his rose and is scared that his sheep will eat it. The pilot drops his tools and consoles the Little Prince, promising to draw a muzzle for his sheep. We then learn more about the rose on his planet. She was beautiful and the little prince took care of her. However, she was kind of needy and a bit arrogant and eventually got caught in a lie. The little prince was very hurt, he lost trust in his flower and they separated. Both of them were very sad, saying bye to each other. He regrets leaving her, saying, "I did not know how to take pleasure in all her grace. I ought to have judged by deeds and not by words." People often struggle with verbal communication and words don't always display how they truly feel. We should instead judge people based on their actions and intentions and not be so quick to give up on a bond that has been formed. Small and meaningless arguments can sometimes cause relationships to end unnecessarily. The little prince leaves his planet on a flock of migrating birds to visit other planets, trying to get a better understanding of the world. On each planet, we meet a different adult, each with a different personal flaw. This all happened before meeting the pilot, and the little prince tells the pilot about his encounters. On the first planet is a king. This king is obsessed with power and sees the little prince only as a subject, someone he can control and have authority over. He clumsily orders around the little prince, claiming he can control everything in the universe, and the little prince kindly asks him to order a sunset. He starts fumbling on his words and tells the little prince that he'll order one at 7:40 p.m. when sunsets happen naturally. The little prince realizes that the king is a phony, loses some respect for him and leaves, mentioning that adults are very strange. On the next planet lived the conceited man, a fancy word for someone who is obnoxiously arrogant. He merely sees the little prince as an admirer. This man, as many humans are, is validation addicted and attention seeking. He wants to be seen as the handsomest, the best dressed, the richest, and the most intelligent. He asks the little prince to clap and admire him as he salutes him with a tip of his cap. He desperately wants the little prince to stay on his planet so that he can keep praising him, but the little prince eventually gets bored of clapping and wonders why this man cares so much about what other people think. The little prince leaves, stating that grown-ups are very odd. On the next planet is an alcoholic, stuck in an endless loop of drinking to forget, wanting to forget because he is ashamed, and because he is ashamed of himself, he drinks. In the little prince's mind, this cycle of addiction and self-destructive behavior doesn't make sense, and he kind of just thinks, why don't you just stop? He leaves, saying that adults are very, very odd. On the next planet is the businessman, who doesn't even notice the little prince's arrival because he's so busy counting his stars, which are a symbol for money and possessions. The little prince asks the businessman what he does with all his stars, and the businessman says, "Nothing. I own them. They make me rich. If I'm rich, I can own more stars." The little prince criticizes him for his circular thinking, similar to the alcoholics that doesn't make much sense, and says what he is doing isn't of any importance because the businessman is of no use to his stars, whereas the little prince is of use to his rose and his volcanoes because he takes care of them. The businessman did not know what to say, as he knew the little prince had a point. The little prince leaves, saying that adults are extraordinary and not in a good way. Located on the next planet is the lamplighter. This man engages in a job that he dislikes, that doesn't make much sense, and he just blindly follows orders. His job is to light the lamp in the evening and turn it off in the morning on his fast-moving planet. He is consumed by his job, as many people are these days. The little prince actually compliments him though, admiring his loyalty and the beauty of his work. He says, when he lights his street lamp, it is as if he brought one more star to life or one more flower. When he puts out his lamp, he sends the flower or the star to sleep. That is a beautiful occupation, and since it is beautiful, it is truly useful. The little prince says that out of all the planets, the lamplighter was the only person that wasn't all that ridiculous and that could potentially be his friend, because he thought about something other than himself. Here, the author outlines what it means to live a meaningful life. You don't obsess over yourself and do what you can to help or be of service to the people around you. Taking on meaningful responsibility beyond yourself is how you live a good life. The next planet was big, and on it was a geographer who wrote big books. The little prince was happy to finally meet someone fascinating who he thought had the cool job of exploring the world. He disappointingly finds out that this geographer only interviews explorers who then relay information to him so that he can write these books and then get attention for how wise he is. However, the geographer doesn't actually learn anything from his own personal first-person experience, which the little prince is not a fan of. When the geographer asks the little prince to describe his planet, he mentions that on it is a rose, to which the geographer replies, "I don't draw flowers because they are ephemeral, meaning they are temporary. He only draws things that are eternal, things that will be around forever, like mountains." This makes the little prince sad because he realizes that the flower he loves won't be around forever. The rose in the story can represent anyone important in our lives, like a friend, a pet, a family member, or a significant other. It's a reminder that all relationships are temporary, and it's important to make the most of the limited time you have with them. The last planet the little prince visits is the Earth, and we're sort of back to the present moment in the Sahara Desert. After hearing these stories from the little prince about the different planets he visited, the pilot tells him that on Earth there are 111 kings, 7,000 geographers, 900,000 businessmen, 7,500,000 alcoholics, and 311 million conceited people, meaning that there are a ton of people on Earth that are power hungry, greedy, materialistic, consumed by alcohol, and obsessed with themselves. The commonality between all these people that the little prince meets is that they are all alone. They do not understand what is most essential. The pilot goes on to say that you could actually fit all of humanity on one little island in the Pacific, but adults wouldn't believe you and would get offended because they think they are far more important than they really are and take themselves way too seriously. On Earth, still before meeting the pilot, the little prince meets a snake, a notorious symbol of evil, who tells him, "I am more powerful than the finger of a king," which can point at and control people. "I can carry you farther than any ship could take you and send you back to where you came from," meaning he could kill the little prince with his venomous bite. But he doesn't, stating that the little prince is too pure and innocent. The little prince asks him why he speaks in riddles, and the snake darkly says, "I solve them all," meaning that the snake's bite, which will lead to death, can solve all of life's problems. When you're dead, your problems, concerns, and worries are gone. It's not exactly clear if the little prince fully understands the snake's riddle or not. Nevertheless, he keeps the snake's offer in the back of his mind in case he wants to return back to where he came from, which was his planet. The little prince goes on, feeling lonely, missing his flower, not encountering any life in the desert for a while, until he stumbles upon a garden of roses. There were thousands of them that looked exactly like his flower. This made him sad, as he thought that his rose was unique and special, but there were actually thousands that were identical to her. The little prince then meets the fox, who teaches him the most important lesson of the book about what's truly important in life. The fox keeps his distance at first, saying that the little prince has not tamed him, as the fox says, an act too often neglected by humans these days. They have not established ties just yet. Taming in this context refers to establishing a relationship, as any kind of relationship with someone who is initially a stranger is developed slowly. Over time, through conversation, time spent together, and adventures experienced together, a bond is eventually established and they are now part of each other's lives. The fox says that his life is very monotone and boring. He hunts chickens and men hunt him, and the chickens and men all look the same. But if the little prince tames him, it'll bring some sunshine to his life. The fox is saying that good relationships with the people around you, your family, your friends, your pets, a significant other, can make even an ordinary life more fun, enjoyable, and meaningful. Because the fox has been tamed by the little prince, he will cry upon saying goodbye. The little prince says, "Why did you want to be tamed if you're just going to be sad once we have to separate?" The fox says that the relationship has done him good, as before meeting the little prince, the wheat fields around the fox meant nothing for him, but now they will remind him of the little prince's golden hair and all the good times they had together. Grief is painful, but once the grief period is over, as explained by the fox, you will be so happy you met that person, and certain things will remind you of the good times you spent with them and will bring you a smile. The fox's explanation of the term tame helps the little prince realize that his flower was indeed unique and special because of the relationship he established with her over time. She was not like all those flowers in the garden. It was the time he spent with her that made her special to him. For example, if you have a golden retriever, what makes it special if there are thousands of golden retrievers in the world, many that probably look exactly like yours? It's the time you spent with your pet that makes them unique to you, and literally nobody else in the world shares that exact relationship. It's unique between you and your pet. The fox tells the little prince, you are responsible forever for what you have tamed, meaning that we are responsible for maintaining the relationships, the bonds we have established in our lives. The fox then gifts the little prince with his secret, the most famous quote of the book, "It is only with the heart that one sees rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Human connection cannot be measured or seen, but only felt with the heart. We are social, emotional beings. We need each other, and the relationships we have with the people around us is the most important aspect of our lives. The little prince then continues his journey and meets a trained switchman who explains that adults are always coming and going, never happy with where they are, and that on the trains, adults sleep and yawn, but the kids' faces are glued to the windows, being curious and having a good time in the present moment. The switchman calls kids lucky, as they have no trouble finding meaning and joy in their lives, even in something as simple as a doll. A lot of grown-ups have trouble appreciating and enjoying the little things around them and do not value the journey as much as accomplishments and end results. The little prince then meets a merchant who tries selling him a pill that quenches thirst. It saves you 53 minutes a week because by taking it, you won't have to waste time looking for water and drinking it. The little prince tells the merchant, "If I had 53 minutes to spend as I liked, I would walk slowly toward a spring of fresh water," showing that saving time isn't useful if the time isn't spent doing something meaningful, and that there is joy and beauty in the journey. Children understand this. Thirsty, the little prince then suggests to the pilot that they go look for a well, which the pilot thinks is an absurd idea in the desert. But they start walking anyways, and during this stroll, the little prince helps the pilot live in the moment and appreciate the beauty of the desert. After a long journey, to the pilot's shock, they find a well. They drink the water together, and the pilot says the water was as sweet as some special festival treat. And the reason it tasted so good is because they worked hard together to get it and shared the moment together as friends. While sharing this delicious water, the little prince says to the pilot, "The men where you live raise 5,000 roses in the same garden, and they do not find what they are looking for. And yet, what they are looking for could be found in one single rose or in a little water," meaning that many grown-ups have a lot of trouble finding purpose and happiness in life, even with so many things around them to be grateful for. They don't make enough effort developing relationships with the thousands of people that surround them and are just never satisfied. The pilot realizes that the little prince will soon be returning to his planet and that it's almost time to say goodbye. And this made him sad because of the bond they formed. The pilot was tamed by the little prince. After some time apart, the little prince is then talking with the snake he met earlier, taking up the snake on his earlier offer of returning him to his planet so that he can be with his rose again. The pilot hears the conversation but doesn't initially see who the little prince is talking to. Realizing that he's talking to a snake, he pulls out his revolver, knowing how dangerous snakes are. The two talk about it, and the pilot realizes that there's nothing he can do. The little prince has made up his mind. He wants to return home. The little prince then reveals that he isn't all that naive as to what's about to happen to him, as he tells the pilot, "It shall look as if I were dead, and that will not be true. I cannot carry this body with me. It is too heavy. My body will be like an old abandoned shell. There is nothing sad about old shells." This suggests that the little prince actually understands he was going to die by the snake biting him. It's possible his plan was to reunite with his rose in heaven, as perhaps he assumed his rose had no chance of surviving with him not taking care of her for so long. Either way, the idea here is that one's physical body is only a vessel. The real essence of a person, their spirit or their soul, lives on forever and can't be lost. The little prince comforts the pilot by telling him that although they didn't mean much for him before, every time he looks at the stars now, he will think of Asteroid B-612 and hear the little prince's laugh, reminding him of the good times they had together. The little prince says, "And when your sorrow is comforted, time soothes all sorrows, you will be happy that you have known me." The snake bites the ankle of the little prince and he collapses slowly and softly into the sand. It is not clear exactly what happens to the little prince afterwards, as his body was not there the next day. 6 years later, the pilot misses his little buddy, and the book ends with him saying that the loveliest and the saddest landscape in the world is where he met and had to say goodbye to the little prince. This goes to show that establishing relationships is a beautiful thing that brings you joy in life, but also brings you sorrow when you have to part ways. But again, once the grief is over, you will never regret establishing a bond with someone, and once time has healed the wound, little things like the person's smile, the person's laugh, or any kind of adventure or success you experience together will stick with you and remind you of the good times you had together. The Little Prince teaches us that while love and friendship come with the pain of separation and loss, they're still the most precious parts of being alive.